So the Six Nations is always brilliant. Every single year it throws up different narratives and different intrigues week to week, and that's partly what makes it such a great competition. But what do you make of the 2024 Six Nations so far? There's no doubt that it still has all of those elements, but I just wonder, with Ireland's dominance, what your view is on this current Six Nations, what you are seeing so far. So welcome back to the channel. A look back on round 3 is in the books. We are hurtling towards the end of the competition. It will be here before we know it. So welcome back. Comment down below on anything I touch upon and like the video, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well. But I wanted to start with a bit more of a broader point. I'll get on to some individual comments on all of the teams, some more than others, but a broader point to start with. I was thinking this question of this particular Six Nations, because whilst they all have similar themes, and as I say, the narratives are there and it's exciting and it's a brilliant competition every single year, what about this particular Six Nations with the current dominance we're seeing from Ireland? Now, I think Ireland are brilliant. This isn't a critique of them whatsoever. I think they are head and shoulders ahead of all of their competition in terms of the Northern Hemisphere at this moment in time. But I was just wondering, in a way, it almost reminds me a little bit of Formula One over the last few years, in that, and I'm not a big Formula One fan, but I know enough about it, that Red Bull have been so dominant, the actual battle for the top of the championship isn't necessarily the most interesting thing. It's all the battles down below, whether it be Wales and Italy improving, and some of those other matches that are throwing up more excitement. Because if you look at it, look at the margin of victory in all of Ireland's games so far. I think 21 points away to France was the lowest. They've blown the other teams they've played away. Admittedly, Italy and Wales are in that, so we'll see what happens against England and Scotland. But their margins of victory have been one thing. The margins of victory, if you combine all of the other games, are a lot less than that. The competitive fixtures are happening below Ireland because Ireland are just so good. And frankly, Scotland could potentially go away to Ireland on the final weekend, cause a massive upset, and this point will be null and void. I'll be chatting absolute rubbish. Some of you probably say I always chat rubbish anyway, but that's by the by. I just wondered whether this Six Nations, something that struck me after 3 weeks, is just the simple fact that Ireland are so good. The real intrigue and interest is in other parts of the championship. And I'm not saying Ireland aren't interesting. I'm not saying the fact that they could be the first team in Six Nations history to do back-to-back Grand Slams. That would be historic. They would be incredible. And it's not their fault that they are just so much further ahead of everyone else. It's not meant as a critique in that way, just more of an observation. You can let me know in the comments whether you agree with me or not, but that's kind of my impression, my feeling after week 3, although with a trip away to Twickenham and that match, as I say, against Scotland, that could well change. Although I don't necessarily see England, after what we saw at the weekend, being able to challenge this England team. But I'll get on to that later on. Let's move on to some of the individual teams. Another theme I thought of this weekend, when I was looking back on it, is teams being out-coached, the disparity in the coaches at the moment. And I thought that was highlighted a little bit in the Scotland-England game, because on the one hand, you had a team there in Scotland who could adapt, be under pressure and get the job done and win. And you had another in England who started well and fell apart. And for me, that comes down to coaching and the ability of the players to problem solve at this moment in time. And there are question marks over England and those coaches. Whilst it is still early in the Steve Borthwick reign, there are questions now being asked. And in fact, I've done a separate video that will be going up on the channel specifically with some thoughts after that Scotland and England game, a few days after it, and my views on it, on England, on where they're going, frustration of the fans. So go and seek that out if you want a bit more detail on what I'm thinking in terms of England at this time. But the other really fascinating thing, I think, from listening to some of the post-match comments of Steve Borthwick, I felt was an element of frustration with the players and how they were executing as they started to overplay, perhaps, cough up mistakes, and Scotland did brilliantly to capitalise on them. What sort of impact does that have on the camp, on those players? What's the mood like in that camp, given that what this regime is trying to do, we see signs of life, but it's not exactly bearing fruit at the moment, both in attack, where they're not scoring many tries, and in defence as well, where when they cough up the ball, you can still get at this England team. Scotland, on the other hand, they were without key players in the week. Finn Russell wasn't there. All those players that had to be released back to Premiership clubs, and Gregor Townsend has spoken about that and his frustration about how even though there aren't Premiership games, they have to release players back to the Premiership. The fact that they didn't have the likes of Finn Russell for a lot of their training, England did have all their players and Scotland still go out and win again, I think speaks back to the fact that Gregor Townsend and that Scotland team, they're better coached at this moment in time than the England team. On to France. So I think by this stage we can say undoubtedly that France are having a post-World Cup blip. I wasn't willing to go there after the opening weekend because of how good Ireland were. Was it simply they came up against a brilliant Ireland team who blew them away, plus they had a player sent off. After week 2, they weren't good at Murrayfield, but Murrayfield isn't a great place to go. I don't mean it in that way. Murrayfield is a tough place to go against a decent Scotland team, and they actually showed the character to get back into the game. After this match against Italy, I think they are having a blip. The thing for me with this French team is I still struggle to think that it's terminal. You know, you see some teams reach a certain level and then they drop off. Their time has come and gone. I look at the age profile of this French team, the depth in the squad, the quality of player they still have, and I struggle to feel that it is a blip that is now going to go on for a long, long time, that it's terminal for them. And I just wonder, could it end up being a good thing? In terms of, like, winning is tough, right? At international rugby, the level is so high. Being consistently good is so difficult, which makes it all the more impressive when you see South Africa go back-to-back World Cups, when you see Ireland winning in the way in which they are. But maintaining it for a long period of time is difficult. Could this be the dip that France needs to then get back to where they want to be in time for the next World Cup? I don't mean to talk about 4-year cycles, but when I was pondering this and I was pondering those French players, I still feel like they will be good. I don't feel like this is the end of the road for this group of players. That's my general thought on France. In terms of Italy, I mean, man, what a missed opportunity for them. What a controversial ending as well. A game involving France, the Garbisi penalty. Were France charging it down? Should it have been retaken? Again, it's another week where I can fully understand why Italian fans would be saying they should have an opportunity to retake it. But yeah, I just can't get away from the fact of what a chance that is for Italy to get that victory. And I suppose the other thing that came to mind, given the fact that Italy have now drawn away in France, right now, would you make them favourites for the match against Wales on the last weekend of the Championship? Which, since the beginning, we thought it could come down to that for who finishes last. That's looking very possible still at the moment. Would Italy, based upon what you've seen, actually be the favourites for that game? Maybe not, because of the fact that it's in Cardiff. But I just wonder, they keep playing like that, then actually the narrative around that game, there could be a bit of pressure on Italy to get a result as well. And they're not traditionally a side, I think, that, well, first of all, they don't tend to have that pressure on them hardly ever when they're playing the top nations, and they don't tend to be able to deliver on it either. So we'll wait and see, really. That's me just pondering. On to Wales and Ireland. I feel like there's less personally to say about these teams after this week. For Wales, they're not going to be the only team to get beaten comfortably by Ireland this Six Nations, as we've spoken about already in terms of their margin of victories. They are a developing squad. They're just in that developmental stage where I almost feel like I can't fully critique them almost until a year's time. Like everyone who's been speaking about Gatland on how much leeway does he have, how much good grace does he have for everything he's done in the past. I feel like he has a year. So this year, I think we have seen some good stuff. I can understand what he means when he thinks in a few years this will be a really good Welsh team. But they're young, they're inexperienced, and they're behind a lot of the other teams in the Six Nations at the moment. But we probably shouldn't lose sight of the fact that they could have easily have won 2 games as well. They could have beaten Scotland, they could have beaten England, and this would be a very, very, very different conversation. So that's kind of general view on Wales. And Ireland, as I've said already, they are head and shoulders at the moment above everyone else. Can they be stopped, really? That is the big question around Ireland. Maybe that's something I'll look to get into another time. That could be a video in itself. Away to Twickenham, at home to Scotland. Right now, you'd have to say Scotland are the more likely to be able to beat them, but the fact that it's in Dublin makes that pretty difficult. I fully expect, like a lot of you I'm sure, Ireland to canter towards the Six Nations title, given that France have dipped off. You remember last year's Six Nations, the France-Ireland game was utterly brilliant. France were great, Ireland were great, Ireland were the victorious ones. And then after that, it was I would say relatively easy for them to win the rest of their games and win the Six Nations. This year, because France have dipped off, I think they are going to breeze through. Personally, I'll be delighted if I'm wrong, not for any reason of not wanting Ireland to win, only because it will mean we would have had some sort of upset, some sort of shock, and that is always good for the competition. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think this Ireland team are just far too good. So those are my general thoughts after the third round of the Six Nations. Let me know what you make of it. In particular, the kind of Formula One analogy. Ireland are so good. Is a lot of the interest coming from elsewhere in the championship and on all the other teams as well. And anything I haven't touched upon in the video as well, you will all follow your teams probably in more detail. So what strikes you about where your nation is at the moment? Only 2 rounds to go as we head into another rest week. Appreciate you watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.